Hello and welcome guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Affinity Chaos, Chapter 21. On seeing they were about to head into the forest, Gray couldn't help but ask, "Senior, will we be heading to the academy by foot?" Gray was puzzled. What have I gotten myself into? At least he should have prepared a carriage to take us there. Chris laughed when he heard Gray's question. Ha ha ha, of course not. Come with me. I'll show you a ride. Chris motioned for Gray to follow him into the forest. Gray looked at him suspiciously before heading into the forest. They walked for some time, before they got to an open field in the forest. Gray was stunned by what he saw. There was a large bird-like creature laying on the grass in the open fields. When Gray got closer and saw the creature up close, he was more astonished. It was a legendary creature. Its head was that of an eagle. It was coated in glossy brown feathers, and had dangerous curved beaks. Two tufts of feathers sprang up its head like they were ears. At its shoulders, a pair of powerful, feathered wings could be seen folded at his back. Behind the wings, the feathers faded into tawny fur, and what looked like the body of a lion took over. Its front leg was that of an eagle with razor-sharp talons that could easily rip him apart, while its hind legs were that of a lion with terrifying sharp claws, which only the tip could be seen. As Gray got closer to it, the creature raised its head to look at the stranger who was coming close to it. Its black beady eyes were enchanting. Gray looked at the majestic creature in front of him, and was lost for words. This. Gray couldn't complete his statement and was stuttering non-stop. Gray had seen magical beasts, so this wasn't his first time seeing one. But this was the legendary beast he had only seen in books. It never crossed his mind he will be able to see one at the start of his cultivation journey. This is Brown, she will be our ride back home. Chris introduced the creature with a smile. He had expected this reaction, so he wasn't surprised. Every time he went out to carry new students, this was always the best part for him. Whenever he sees the shocked reactions in the faces of the new students, it always makes him laugh. "It's a griffin," Gray exclaimed. Gray's eyes never once left the creature since seeing it for the first time. This was one of the rulers of the sky in terms of aerial speed, and it had terrifying strength. How can Gray not be shocked? He started wondering the identity of this senior who came to this small city. There was no way he will get to ride a griffin here if he were ordinary. Griffins weren't legendary for nothing. First of all, getting the chance to see one was incredibly hard as they were rare beasts. Taming one was even harder. Griffins are proud beasts, and would rarely allow themselves to be tamed by humans. Even when caught, it would fight back with all it has. Clearly the relationship between Brown and Senior Chris isn't ordinary, since he could leave her here without worrying she would escape for so long. Chris walked towards Brown and gently caressed her feathers. Gray just stood at a spot looking at the majestic beast without moving. This truly was unexpected. Now he was also eager to go to the academy. How would the academy look like? He couldn't wait. "Are you going to stand there all day? Come on, let's get going." Chris laughed again on seeing how Gray was still standing stunned. "Is she really going to be the one to take us there?" Gray asked again to be extra sure. Although he knew it was a stupid question, he just had to ask it. If not her, then who? "Do you have any other means of going?" Chris retorted grumpily. I think his brain is already fried from shock, Chris thought inside. Gray dropped his head embarrassedly. "Can't you just reply normally? You have seen the creature for a long time. This is my first time seeing it. Let me admire it in peace," Gray thought grumpily. Gray suddenly felt he made the right choice in choosing the Lunar Academy. Just seeing a legendary beast before he even went to the academy suddenly felt worth it. He could brag with this for a long time. He almost wanted to run back to Martha and tell her he just saw a griffin. When Brown stood up, Gray was once again stunned by its immense size. It stood over 5 meters tall with a length of over 3 meters. It truly was a majestic beast. Gray walked closer to Brown with extreme caution. He was scared of irritating the beast, else it might just rip him to shred with those terrifying talons it possessed. As Gray stood closer to it, he felt how small he was. Chris just stood at the side looking on. He has always enjoyed this. This was the reason he always came to little cities for the test. This was the 4th time he was coming to Red City for the test. Surprisingly, he witnessed Gray took the test twice. Unlike the other representatives, he can head over to other cities. Maybe it was fate that made him witness the miracle which Gray was. He couldn't describe the feeling, but he knew Gray wouldn't be someone ordinary in his life. He had heard of how Gray suddenly started training in the forest after failing to awaken his element. Not only that, but he also heard how Gray was able to defeat Derek, who was already at the 8th stage of the collection plane easily. This wasn't something someone ordinary can achieve. He was looking forward to Gray's future accomplishments. Come on, let's get going. We have a long journey ahead of us, Chris said after allowing Gray fill his eyes with the image of Brown some more. Brown squatted down so they could climb onto her. Gray climbed up easily and looked ahead with great enthusiasm. They were about to head for the academy. After they climbed up and steadied themselves, Chris patted Brown on her back, indicating it was time to leave. Brown took off into the air. Chapter 22. 2 days later, Gray and Chris were in a restaurant having a meal. Usually, elementalists could go days without eating, but most of them still enjoy the taste of delicious foods, so they eat whenever they can. And some foods are also helpful to cultivators. Gray hasn't started cultivating yet, so he still had to depend on the nourishment of food. Although he could go without eating for a day, he would rather not. Gray was a foodie, he loved food a lot, so him not eating is like a punishment to him. Senior, how come I am the only one who joined the Lunar Academy from Red City? Gray asked after taking a big bite of the meat in front of him. He noticed there wasn't any other kid going with him to the academy, and it was quite strange, since other academies' representatives get at least 2 kids when they're heading back. Well, we have a low admission rate, Chris said without even raising his head. Clearly he was also just like Gray, a foodie. Gray could see how much Chris was enjoying his meal, so he decided to ask after their meal. They had been making stops in different cities during their journey. They would have to stop flying when it was almost dark to get to a city where they would have to sleep at an inn. Gray had already taken note of how much Chris loved eating. They hadn't spoken much during the journey. Whenever they are in the air, Gray always studied his environment and carefully observed their traveling routes. It was a stunning sight while he was in the air. It felt amazing. Surprisingly, Brown can make air shields that would stop the air from hitting them while she is flying at full speed. Brown would have to hide in a forest close to the city whenever they stopped and went into a city, since unlike other aerial magical beasts, she was rare. Of course, she wouldn't be in any danger in a place like this, since she was stronger than the residents in the cities. Well, that only applies to small cities. But we also have the highest retention rate, meaning we rarely chase out our students for not meeting the required stage during the yearly test. All our students are hardworking, Chris continued. Oh, was the only reply Gray could give. He knew about the yearly tests the academies give to their students. This was one of the reasons Derek was in the city. The competition is really tough at the academy. You will know more when you get there. Chris refrained from going deep in details of how the academy operates. Gray didn't ask any more questions, since he could clearly see Chris wasn't going to tell him anything. After eating, they immediately went to the inn to get some sleep. Since they still had about 2 days' journey ahead of them, they needed to rest properly. 2 days later, Gray looked at the biggest city gate he had ever seen. Gray could see people entering and exiting the city on a large scale. This truly was a large city, unlike Red City where he previously stayed. Lunar Academy was situated 1 kilometer west of the city. Lunar Academy was named after the city. The city was boisterous. Gray curiously looked around. Senior, why did we come over to the city? Is the academy located in the city? Gray asked. He knew most academies weren't located in the cities, and were mostly located outside the city. No, we are heading over to meet a friend of mine. After that, we'll head over to the academy, Chris said while heading in the direction of the city. Oh, okay, Gray responded while closely following behind him. When they got into the city, they headed straight towards the center of the city. Gray studied the city closely. It was a very busy place, and people could be seen walking everywhere. They stopped at the front of a huge manor. Although Gray wasn't a resident of this city, he could tell this was definitely the biggest manor in the city. There were guards at the gate of the manor, but they didn't stop them from going in. What a nice place. The tranquility of the garden calmed Gray's tired mind. He had been restless throughout their journey, but being here was able to calm his heart. He closed his eyes to sink deeper into this peaceful state. Chris walked out after some time with a young boy in tow. The boy was about the same age as Gray. He had refined features and looked quite handsome. When they got to the garden, he looked at the stranger who had his eyes closed like he was in a trance. "Gray, it's time to leave," Chris said loudly. Chris's voice disrupted Gray's reverie. Gray opened his eyes and stared at Chris. He noticed Chris didn't come alone and was with a young boy. Gray stared at him for some time before redirecting his gaze back at Chris. "Okay, senior," he replied with a smile. Staying in the garden for this short time had really helped calm the state of his mind. "Oh, Gray, this is Klaus." Chris introduced the newcomer to Gray. "It's nice meeting you. I'm Gray," Gray said while stretching out his right hand. "I'm Klaus. It's nice meeting you too." Klaus shook his hand with a smile. Gray evaluated Klaus, and Klaus was also doing the same. Klaus had always been proud of his looks, but this was the first time he was totally defeated by someone else in terms of looks. "He's not bad," Gray praised Klaus for his looks in his heart. "But I'm still better." Gray felt it was impossible to see someone as handsome as he was. "Klaus is a student of the academy. Since we were going to the academy, he decided to come along," Chris said calmly. Chris turned after saying this and walked in the direction of the exit. Chapter 23. The trio left the city and headed west. Gray already knew they were heading towards the academy, so he just stayed quiet without speaking much. "So where are you from?" Klaus broke the silence. Since they would be walking all the way to the academy, he might as well have a conversation with Gray. If only Chris had allowed them to take a carriage, it would have been better, but he refused when Klaus brought it up. "I'm from Red City. It's a long way from here," Gray replied. "Oh, I've never heard of it." Klaus thought for a while before responding. "It's not a big place, so it's normal you don't know about it." Gray flashed a smile on his face. "How come you came together with Senior Chris?" "I thought he went out to get new students," Klaus asked with a puzzled expression. He had never seen Chris come back with a kid older than the age of 12 whenever he heads out for the test. Sometimes, he doesn't even return with anyone. Chris went out for the usual annual test for new kids who just awoken their elements. But seeing him returning with someone who was fully over the age was surprising. "Well, I just awakened my element." Gray figured there was no use in lying to Klaus, since they would attend the same academy and would get to see each other. "Did you wait until now before you had the test?" Klaus asked. This was the only reason he could think of when he heard what Gray said. But it was unexpected that someone would delay until they were over 12 years old before taking the test. This would put you at a big disadvantage with your peers, since they would have already cultivated to a higher level before you can even start cultivating. "No, I had the test once when I was still 12 years old, but I failed to awaken my element at that time, so after waiting for 4 years, I took the test again," Gray explained. "Wait, you failed to awaken your element?" Klaus was dumbstruck when he heard this statement. This was totally outrageous. Not being able to awaken an element at the age of 12 was usually very rare, but being able to awaken your element after failing to do so while you were 12 years old was even rarer. Since there weren't many people who didn't awaken their element when they were 12 years old, so the amount who could later awaken their element were few in numbers. In fact, in the Killen Empire, there haven't been any such case happening in recent times. Yes, Senior was also present on the day I failed the test. He was the only one who spoke encouraging words to me that day. Gray recounted what he could. Although he remembered little, he still recalled what Chris said to him. "So, what element did you awaken after the test?" Klaus asked curiously. "Lightning and earth element," Gray replied, hiding nothing from him. "You're a dual elementalist," Klaus exclaimed. Chris looked back when heard Klaus's shout. Klaus immediately closed his mouth, fearing to anger Chris. "Yes, I am," Gray answered. Klaus felt fascinated by Gray's story. This was something truly shocking. At first, he couldn't awaken an element. Then later on, he awakened not only one but 2 elements. And one of them was the rare lightning element, and they generally regarded the other as the element with the best defense. With lightning's terrifying attack, coupled with Earth's resilient defense, he could say Gray was a perfect fighter, wielding both attack and defense respectively. "How about you? What element did you awaken during your test?" Gray inquired. "Well, I'm a water elementalist," Klaus declared with a calm voice. He had already been at the academy for some time now. "Okay, Gray thought of his mother when he heard Klaus was a water elementalist. He knew she was terrifying. Luckily, she only freezes his legs and doesn't do more whenever he messes up. Gray and Klaus continued talking as they walked closer to the academy. Gray got to find out there were 5 halls in the academy, with each hall representing an element. There was the water hall, the fire hall, the earth hall, the wind hall, and the lightning hall. There were also special classes which took place at the academy. Each hall was further divided into 3 classes for 3 cultivation planes, respectively. Collection plane students are in the first class in their subsequent elemental hall. The fusion plane students are in the second class, while the third class were for the arcane students. Klaus was already in the third class, which was for the arcane plane students. Gray was astonished by how fast they cultivate. He also found out Klaus was a purple graded talent just like HIM for now. He was slightly taken aback since Klaus made no mention of the darkness or light halls. Compared to the lightning element, they were far rarer, but he never thought they would be this rare. After asking Klaus the reason for the lack of darkness and light halls, he found out it was because they had no instructor who was a light or darkness elementalist. After all, a light or darkness elementalist rarely appears. How long would it take him to get to the arcane plane? Well, he couldn't wait. Apart from the time Chris looked at Klaus, he didn't interrupt their conversation, not even once during their entire journey. They reached the academy before long, and Gray stood awed by it. Well, if he says the gate of Lunar City was the largest he had seen, then the gate of Lunar Academy was the grandest. The gate erected at over 9 meters high, with a width reaching over 6 meters. The designs on the gates seemed lifelike, and when Gray looked closely, he could see the image of a phoenix at the center of the gate. They headed into the academy grounds. The academy was clearly bigger than Red City. The moment they entered the academy, Chris immediately ditched Gray, and only instructed Klaus on what to do before disappearing. Gray glanced at the unreliable Chris without much reactions. Since he already had a good relationship with Klaus, he didn't have any problems with Klaus showing him around. So where are we headed first? Gray asked with some enthusiasm. We're going to get you registered first of all. Then after that, I'll introduce the academy to you. Klaus told Gray his plan. Gray agreed with it. Since he was here, he should register as a student of the academy. Klaus and Gray discussed as they headed in the direction of the registration building. Chapter 24. Klaus took Gray to the registration building. When they got there, they noticed about 8 kids were waiting to get their registration done. Klaus told Gray to join the queue, since he was here to get his registration done. The kids all looked at Gray with peculiar eyes. Even the instructors who brought them over did the same. When they saw Klaus, they knew Gray being here had something to do with Chris, so they just let him be. Although they were curious about him, they didn't bother with him. When Gray went in to get his registration done, the instructors went over to Klaus to find out who Gray was. Hey Klaus, who's the fella you brought over? I haven't seen him in the academy before. Did he come with Senior Chris? He's a little too old to register with the new batch, isn't he? They asked Klaus so many questions that his head immediately started arching. Klaus just looked at them and was speechless. These were instructors of the academy, yet they all act like 12-year-olds. This was what made the academy more interesting. The instructors are very welcome with the students. Although they do have moments when they're strict, they are friendly most of the time. Klaus is still amazed by how almost every single instructor in the academy had odd personalities. Like, how do the academy even find these bunch of weirdos? But he couldn't deny the fact that they were all superb in their fields, and were outstanding teachers. He's Gray. He just took the test this year. This was why he just joined the academy. Klaus replied in a helpless manner. Is he a moron? Who would wait till they were above 15 years old before they take the test? I must say, he's quite handsome. Yeah, I don't think I have seen anyone this handsome before. He definitely is a gem. I thought you were the most handsome in the academy, Klaus. But this friend of yours is definitely better looking than you. While they were talking, one of the female instructors brought up how handsome Gray looked. If Gray had been present and heard those comments, he would have been like, you bet I am. He actually took the test while he was 12 years old. but failed to awaken his element. He only awakened his element this year. Klaus told them the reason Gray was just taking the test. And he's a dual elementalist. Klaus added. It amazed the instructors when they heard Gray's story. From not being able to awaken his element to turning into a dual elementalist. It was truly something else. They've not seen anyone who was unable to awaken his talent before, so they were quite shocked. These cases were rare in the Empire. While they were still discussing how handsome Gray looked, Gray stepped out of the registration office. He curiously looked at the instructors who were having a heated conversation with Klaus. The moment Klaus noticed Gray was already out of the registration office, he immediately went over to him, stopping him from coming any closer, before quickly escaping with him. He definitely didn't want Gray to see how weird the instructors of the academy were on his first day. Gray was surprised because of Klaus's reaction, but said nothing. While they were walking, Klaus thought of something and asked, by the way, where is your living quarter located? They assigned each student a quarter for staying. Their living quarters occupied the western and southern parts of the academy. The instructors and other academy workers' quarters were located in the northern part of the academy. The eastern part housed the halls used for classes, the library, the registration office, and the mission hall. They assigned me a living quarter at the western part, Gray said as he fished out the card they gave him at the registration room. He glanced at it and saw the number 413 on it. Klaus looked over at the card. Oh, you're assigned to quarter 413. You know where it is? Gray asked when said this. Yes, my living quarter is also situated in the western part, so we will see each other more easily, Klaus said with a smile. Okay, Gray replied. Since they were in the eastern part of the academy, Klaus showed Gray the halls used for classes. Each hall's building was enormous, with only the lightning hall being smaller than the rest. Gray found out there were over 800 students in the academy, but the number didn't exceed 900. This surprised him. Academies usually have more than 5,000 students. How come the Lunar Academy had such small number of students? Do you know why the recruitment rate of the academy is low? It's baffling that an academy this big only has 800 plus students. Gray was puzzled by this. There have been one time they admitted a student whose talent was only orange, but I heard he was a dual elementalist with both elements having orange talent respectively. Klaus continued. Gray was amazed by the requirements to get into the Lunar Academy. The other academies don't have this requirement also, right? Gray asked. No, they recruit students with orange talent. Some even recruit students with pink talent, but the top 5 academies don't accept pink grade talent in their academies. Each academy has their given requirements, though. Although we have the lowest numbers of students, we have the second highest numbers of blue talent in the entire empire. We're second only to the Emperor's organization, Klaus stated proudly. They walked towards the eastern part of the academy, towards the living quarters of the students. Gray quietly memorized all the information Klaus was telling him. Chapter 25. Gray and Klaus walked towards the students' living quarters. Klaus had shown Gray most parts of the academy while they were walking. Oh, they informed me at the registration office that the new students would have to assemble to take the test again. Is there any use for this? Gray remembered what he was told at the office, and asked Klaus in a puzzled manner. This didn't happen in the academy previously. It was only after an instructor brought his relative to the academy, and he wasn't up to the requirements of the academy. The academy only found out after some time. Therefore, although each new students have already done the test in their cities, they will also take the test again here in the academy. Klaus explained the reason for the test. In the living quarters, Gray saw each student had a house in a spacious compound. All the buildings had the same size and style. Each compound was approximately 220 yards in length and width. It was massive for a single student. Each compound had a number tagged at the small gate leading into the compound. They walked until they got to the compound, with the number 413 on the gate. Gray fished out the key given to him at the registration office, and opened the gate. When they went into the house, it was dusty and cobwebs could be seen everywhere. There were chairs, and when Gray went into the room, he also found a bed well placed at the side of the room. It was decent for a student. After Gray completely checked out the house, he asked Klaus where his house was located. I stay at building 227, Klaus replied. Gray followed Klaus to his apartment and stayed with him for some time. He left quickly since he would have to clean up. Due to the space before each compound, the environment was quiet. He noticed the academy didn't give any special treatments to the students, and each house contained the same things. The students can decide to decorate it after they start living in them. He thought students would have to stay in the same building. But since the students in the Lunar Academy aren't much, they could live alone in each building. Gray worked almost all through the day and didn't step out once. By the time he was done cleaning, it was already night. He was totally exhausted and immediately fell asleep. The next morning, Gray woke up early as he usually does and washed up before heading towards where the new students were to take the test. Klaus already showed him the place, and he had a good memory, so he quickly found the hall. When he got there, he saw 20 kids were already there. They had to wait outside the hall. More students appeared before the instructors came out of the hall. Gray counted and found out they were only 46 new students. How can such a big academy have this small amount of new students? Gray thought, stupefied by the academy's selection. Gray focused his gaze at the instructors who came out of the hall. They were led by a woman who seemed to be in her 50s. When she got closer to the student, she spoke in a clear voice. Hello everyone, I'm the head instructor of the Wind Hall. We will now begin the test to know which halls each student will be going to. Once you hear your name, you should head into the hall for the test. An instructor by the side said after the woman finished talking. The first name on the list was quickly called up, and the kid went into the hall filled with excitement. The instructors were pretty fast with the test, since they already knew the elements and talents of each kid. They just had to follow the rules. Soon it got to Gray's turn. When he stepped in, all the instructors looked at him with interest. They've heard of how he could not awaken an element when he was 12 years old, and could only do so when he got to 16 years of age. They felt he was pretty lucky since he could awaken his element even after failing to do so initially. Since you all haven't officially started cultivating yet, you won't really need to go to classes. You all have 1 month to get into the collection plane, and then start your classes. Now you can head to the first floor of the library to collect the cultivation technique, the head instructor of the Wind Hall said before dismissing the kids. When Gray was about to leave, he was called up by a man among the instructors. I'm the head instructor of the Lightning Hall. You can call me Instructor Blake, Blake said with a friendly smile. Hello, sir, Gray said courteously. Blake looked sharp and handsome. He looked like someone in his early 30s and had a dignified voice. Well, it sounded dignified when he heard him speak just now. Actually, I'm the only instructor in the Lightning Hall, so I take all my new students of the hall very importantly, Blake said seriously. Gray immediately knew why he called up only him. Seems like I'm the only one who has an affinity with the lightning element among all the new students, Gray thought. From this, one could see just how rare the lightning element is. Come with me. You don't need to go over to the library to take a technique. Besides, they are all low-leveled ones, Blake said with a smile. Blake, what are you doing? Gray heard a stern voice from behind Instructor Blake. Blake immediately tensed up when he heard this voice. Nothing, Blake replied with a small voice. Gray stared at Blake, completely shocked by his sudden change. 1 second he was a dignified man, the next he was as meek as a child. Chapter 26. Gray stared in the direction of the voice was coming from, and saw it was the head instructor of the Wind Hall. Blake turned around to meet the icy gaze of the lady. He instinctively took a step back. You should know we don't give special treatments to any of our students, said the woman in an icy voice. Instructor Lin, I'm not giving him any special treatment. You know clearly that my hall has the least number of students, so I try to help them as much as I can, Blake explained briefly. It changes nothing. All new students are required to have the same starting point. Lin snorted coldly. She was quite surprised by Blake's behavior. He usually doesn't act like this towards a new student. Well, he will also be given an ultimatum if he accepts to take this technique, Blake said seriously. Ultimatum? Lin asked. Gray raised his brow when he heard this. He didn't want any special treatment from the academy. Well, a special treatment would be nice, but having an ultimatum attached to it isn't. He waited to listen closely to the ultimatum. Yes, since he will get to use a better technique, the time required for him to break through is shorter also, replied Blake. How long precisely? Lynn asked. 10 days. Blake responded. When Lynn heard this, she was surprised. Something like this hadn't happened in the academy before, so it was quite surprising. She felt something was fishy about all this. Since this ultimatum is attached to it, I will let it slide. Lynn gave in while giving Blake an understanding look. She knew this wasn't Blake's idea. It must have been from the higher-ups in the academy. She turned to glance at Gray. Well, do you agree this? Gray didn't really expect all this. He would be given a better technique, but the deadline would be shortened. I'll accept it, Gray said after thinking for some time. The first reason he accepted this was due to the fact that he loves challenges, and this will stimulate him to work harder. The second reason was that he was already behind his peers due to his delay, so he wanted to do everything he could to advance at a quicker pace. Okay, since it's settled, you can head over to my office. I will be there shortly, Blake stated, clearly approving of Gray's decision to accept this challenge. Gray asked Blake for directions to his office before leaving. After Gray left, Lynn looked at Blake. I know this wasn't your idea. Although you have the lowest number of students, you have never given any of them such treatments. I received this letter yesterday. It was from Chris. Blake handed a letter over to her. Chris. Lynn took the letter with a suspicious look before going through it. Her face changed a couple of times before returning it to Blake. Although he goes out for the test, he doesn't concern himself with the affairs of the academy for a long time now. Why is he suddenly interested in this boy? Lynn asked. He was the one who brought him over to the academy. He was also present when he failed to awaken his element during his first test. So I think he developed an interest for him, Blake explained. But this is clearly the same cultivation technique as the one the other kids are going to pick up from the library. Lynn furrowed her brows. The technique the letter stated to give to Gray was exactly the same as the one the other kids would get. Yes, it is. Chris said I should tell Gray this technique is better than the one the kids would take at the library. Blake replied with mixed feelings. He didn't want to trick a new student, but he couldn't say no to what Chris ordered. This will be difficult for him, but not impossible. Lynn was visibly shocked. Blue talents wouldn't have an issue breaking through within 10 days. Since Gray was a dual elementalist, it was also possible. Since they didn't want to put too much pressure on the kids, they usually gave all of them the same time without differentiating the ones with higher talents. I have no idea why he said this, but that was what he told me to do. Blake gave a wry smile. Chris has always had an odd personality, so they didn't know what he was up to. Since it was his idea, we'll wait and see what happens, Lynn said before leaving. Gray headed to the lightning department and quickly found Blake's office, according to the description he was given. When he got there, he waited patiently for Blake. Blake arrived quickly. The both went in, and Blake sat down at his chair. The office was well organized, and a bookshelf could be seen at the side. There was a seat at the center of the room. Sit down. Gray sat while still surveying the office. This is the technique. You have 1 day to memorize the patterns. After that, you must return it to me, since you are not supposed to hold on to such a precious technique for longer periods. Blake handed over a scroll to Gray. The scroll had the detailed description of how Gray was to cultivate. Gray looked at it before keeping it. Okay, sir. Gray left the office and headed back home to study the scroll perfectly to ensure there wouldn't be any mistakes while he was cultivating. Chapter 27. Gray went back to his house and immediately started studying the scroll. He had to return it by tomorrow, so he had to make use of his time well. Just like the scroll he got from his mother, this one was also very detailed to ensure whoever was using it doesn't make a mistake. Making a mistake while cultivating can be very disastrous. Worst case scenario, the elementalist dies. Best case scenario was getting bedridden for at least 3 months. Gray studied the patterns described in the scroll and also the instructions. There were 9 layers outside the body which will hinder the absorption of the elemental particles. Once one can get to sense these 9 layers and break the first layer, It was a sign of entering the collection plane. While in the collection plane, the elementalist will have to break each of the 9 layers. The process of breaking them indicates the advancement in the collection plane. For each layer broken, the elementalist advances a stage in the plane. The first thing stated on the scroll was to get into a meditative trance and try to sense the elements in the air. Once you are done with that, the next phase is to attract the elemental particles with the given technique to your body. Gray didn't have an issue with getting into a meditative trance, since he had been meditating for a year now, trying to comprehend the elements. He quickly entered into a meditative state, and following the instructions stated in the scroll, he tried sensing the elements. It would take an average kid a day or 2 to be able to fully enter a meditative state for the first time. Since Gray had already done it before, he could enter easily. He calmed his mind and was able to enter a meditative state after 10 minutes. He felt many silver-colored specks floating around him. It was fascinating. He became excited when he sensed them and lost concentration. His excitement disrupted his meditative state, and he was forced to exit it. Those silver-colored specks must be the lightning element, Gray said with excitement. How come I was only able to sense the lightning element? Gray felt stumped by what was happening. Since he was a dual elementalist, he should have been able to sense both the earth and lightning element. But he only sensed the lightning element, with no trace of the earth element. I'll try it again. I got distracted quickly. Maybe that was the cause of me not noticing the earth element. Gray quickly decided to try again. He calmed his mind and entered a meditative state once more. This time, when he sensed the silver-colored specks, he tried to focus more to see if he could sense the earth element. Unsurprisingly, he faintly started sensing the earth element around him. Due to the fact that his talent grade for the lightning element was higher than the earth element, he could only sense the lightning element first. Only after completely focusing his mind was he able to sense the earth element. The other reason he was able to quickly sense the earth element was due to the fact that he was sitting on the earth. Since an elementalist had the advantage when they were in a place where their elements were abundant, earth elementalists basically have the advantage over other elementalists, since battles were mostly carried out on the ground. After sensing the elements, it was time for Gray to try out the next phase. If he can successfully attract the elements to his body and break through the first layer, then he would have successfully broken into the collection plane. He followed the instructions, but there was no result. Although the time given to him by the academy was shorter than the one given to the rest of the children, he felt since he was given a better technique, he wouldn't have a problem in entering the collection plane within these 10 days. The next day, Gray went over to the lightning hole to return the scroll back to Blake. When he got there, he saw 8 students from the lightning hall. They were all around his age, with only 2 looking slightly older. When they saw him, they immediately focused their attention on him. They hadn't seen him before, and students from the other halls rarely comes to the lightning hall. Hello, I'm Gray. Gray introduced himself to them when he noticed them approaching him. Hello, I'm Alice. One of the girls in the group stepped forward and introduced herself. Are you new here? Alice asked. Yes. I just completed my admission yesterday. I came over to see Instructor Blake. Gray answered. Oh, you're a student of the Lightning Hall? Alice asked again. She wanted to confirm if Gray was a student of their hall also. Although students from the other halls rarely came to their hall, doesn't mean they don't come at all. Yes, Gray replied with a smile. Haha, then we are brothers. A boy in the group suddenly spoke up with a laugh. Gray shifted his attention from Alice and stared at the boy who just spoke up. That is Reynolds. Students of the Lightning Hall are united since we have the least number of people. Alice introduced the boy who just spoke. You can call me Ray, Reynolds said, smiling while stretching out his hand. Gray shook it with a smile also on his face. Gray and the group got along well, and he got to know the names of everyone in the group. What plane are you in? Reynolds suddenly asked after they had talked for a while. Since they were all in the same hall, knowing each other more wasn't bad. Actually, I only just started cultivating, Gray said with an embarrassed smile. When the group heard this, they looked at each other, clearly not expecting this answer. How come you only just started cultivating? Alice asked with surprise. Gray told them of how he was unable to awaken his element the first time, and was only able to do it after 4 years. They were all also surprised since Gray was a dual elementalist. They knew how rare the lightning element was, being a dual elementalist. and having the lightning element as one of your elements was stunning. Oh, so that's the reason. Anyway, you can easily catch up since you're a dual elementalists. Reynolds encouraged Gray sincerely. Gray didn't expect they would treat that like it was nothing. He suddenly felt being in the lightning hole wouldn't be as boring as he thought. They talked for some time before Gray asked to be excused, so he could go over and meet Blake. Only after Reynolds asked of what was his house number before he allowed Gray to go. Gray went over to Blake's office with a smile on his face. He felt great since he got to have new friends. When he got to the office, Blake was sitting lazily at his desk. Gray returned the scroll over to him. Blake asked him repeatedly if he had completely memorized the pattern. Only after Gray had assured him repeatedly did he collect the scroll. Although he was given an order by Chris, he didn't expect Gray to completely memorize it in a day. He only told him what he was told by Chris, but he had no problem with Gray holding on to it for another day if he couldn't memorize. After Gray left the office, he went over to Klaus's house to check on him. After talking for some time, he immediately went back home to once again start meditation. Chapter 28. 2 days passed without any notable progress. In these 3 days, Gray had tried multiple times to break the first layer, but failed. He was able to successfully attract the elemental particles on the second day. Gray had also searched for a place where he could continue his usual physical training. He was already accustomed to it, and after his battle with Derek the last time, he knew training his body has its advantages. He didn't want to be disturbed at the academy, so he chose to find someplace else. Gray soon found a spot, a mountain located right behind the Lunar Academy. Being located close to a mountain range, naturally there were many mountains close to the academy. Gray also went to take classes during these 3 days, and decided he'll just stay at home. When he got to class 1 of the lightning hole, he was shocked by the number of students in the class. He was literally the only student in class 1. He later found out the academy gives all new students a year to break through from the collection plane to the fusion plane. So all the previous class 1 students are already in class 2. Most of the students of the lightning hole are in class 2, with class 3 only have 9 students. The total students in the lightning hole was a meager 24, including Gray. Since he was the only student with the lightning element among the new recruits, there was no way for class 1 to have another student, because students are recruited once every year. Blake told him to focus fully on trying to break through to the collection plane. For now, there isn't anything important to teach him, so Gray just focused fully on his training. Gray had only 7 days left to break through. He didn't put pressure on himself since he was already very close to doing it. He felt it wouldn't take him up to the said 10 days before he breaks through to the first stage of the collection plane. On the 7th day when Gray was meditating, he heard a puncturing sound. That was the sound made when someone breaks through a layer. He had finally broken through to the first stage of the collection plane. After breaking through, he felt his body strengthening under the influence of the elements which were rushing into his body. Although little, it still caused a little change for him. He felt stronger than before and also much lighter. What a great feeling, Gray said with delight. The feeling of breaking through was new to him. He felt great pleasure from it. His body was greedily sucking in the elements and improving his physique with each passing second. Gray calmed his mind and continued his meditation. He had already broken through to the collection plane, so he felt totally relieved. The next morning, he went to the mountain as usual for his physical training. He noticed his strength, speed, stamina, senses have all increased. Although by a little, since he trains every day, he was able to notice it. Gray didn't stop his meditation after breaking through to the collection plane. He knew this was only just the beginning, and he needed to work hard if he wants to have any hopes of catching up with his peers. The strong became strong one step at a time and through achieving many accomplishments. Gray was able to break through another layer before the 10th day. His speed could be said to be terrifying, as it would take a new elementalist at least 2 months to go through from the first layer to the second, given they had purple talent. Even those with blue talents would take at least a month and a half to achieve this feat. Only the most exceptional ones do it within a month. Blake's office. Today is the last day. Do you think he can do it? Lynn asked thoughtfully. I don't know, but I told him to report to me today. No matter the outcome of his training, Blake replied. He hadn't seen Gray since he told him to focus fully on his cultivation. He wasn't confident in Gray breaking through within these 10 days. If he had been given 20 days, then he would have been certain he would. But 10 days, it was just too short for him. I can't believe you actually played such a trick on a new student. A soft voice filled with amusement rang in the office. Blake looked at where the voice came from with a long face. The speaker was one of the instructors of the water hall. She looked like she was still in her early 20s. Delia, I've already told you it wasn't my idea. I'm not that free to play tricks on kids. Blake immediately rebutted. Enough you two. One more word from you and I'll send you out, Delia. Lynn immediately stepped in. She knew there would be no end to it if they didn't stop it. Delia was the only instructor present who wasn't a head instructor. What is she even doing here? Blake asked in displeasure. She heard about it and was also curious to see if Gray would succeed. She begged to follow, and I couldn't say no. The head instructor of the water hall shrugged while answering. If Gray could successfully break through to the first stage of the collection plane within 10 days, it would be the fastest of any student in the history of the academy. This was the reason the head instructors were all present. Only one student had been able to successfully break through to the collection plane in 10 days. And that student was precisely Delia. She had a blue talent and was a freaking cultivation. Although she was still very young, she had already caught up with most of the instructors who taught her while she was still a student. Gray walked towards the hall while humming a little tune to himself. He was in a great mood after breaking through to the second stage of the collection plane the previous night. This technique is truly great. It only took me 10 days to break through 2 layers. Gray couldn't help but praise the technique in his heart. He felt grateful to Chris for giving him this special treatment. Knock knock. Gray lightly knocked at the door. Enter. Blake's voice could be heard from the office. Gray opened the door of the office and went in. He was startled when he walked in. He realized Blake wasn't alone in the office. The only person he recognized was Lynn. Oh, sorry. I didn't know you were busy. Gray apologized and turned around quickly, heading outside the office. He closed the door after going out without even waiting for a response. Blake and the other instructors were dumbstruck, never expecting something like this to happen. Chapter 29. After Gray closed the door, he was about to leave when he heard a roar coming from the office. Gray, where the hell are you going? Get back here now. Blake's voice thundered from the office. Gray froze with fright when he heard the shout. At the office. Ha ha. What an interesting fellow. Delia covered her mouth while giggling. After the initial surprise at how quick Gray left the office, she felt amused by it. Blake glared at her with a spiteful look. He was incensed when Gray just taken off without even waiting for a response from him. Gray turned around and opened the door lightly. He thought Blake was having a meeting with the other head instructors, especially after he recognized Lynn. He never expected Blake would still have time to attend to him. He planned on waiting outside, probably seeing Reynolds and the rest before returning. After entering, he closed the door gently behind him and looked up, feeling slightly anxious. Blake stared at him with anger still visible in his face. Why did you leave the office? Blake asked with slight annoyance. Lynn glanced at Blake, then back at Gray. Sigh, forget it, Lynn suggested. She knew Blake was only grumpy because of Delia and nothing else. Delia stared at Blake with a mocking smile. Blake didn't even bother with her anymore, as he knew she would just aggravate him. Gray, we aren't having a meeting. Actually, they're all here for you. Blake calmed down and spoke after seeing Gray was just looking at him saying nothing. Me? Gray asked with a confused look. I have always been focused on training. How did they even know me? Gray thought. Yes, you. They wanted to know if you would be able to break through within these 10 days. Blake explained with a smile to disperse the slight unease Gray might be feeling with so many people present here. Oh, that? I thought it was something else. Gray said in a relieved tone. He thought he had done something he wasn't supposed to. That was why they were here for him. You don't need to be tense, they are all head instructors here like me. Except for a certain someone though. Blake stressed the last part of the sentence while looking at Delia. He had the she's the one I'm talking about look when he was staring at her. Delia snorted coldly when she heard what Blake said, and the look he was giving her. Humph, if not for the fact you are still stronger than me, I'd have beaten you up for a long time. Now she thought inside. Gray followed his eyes and saw the stunningly beautiful Delia. Gray greeted them with a smile, trying to look the best he could. Delia looked at him, seemingly surprised by how handsome he was. The initial time Gray entered the office, she didn't get a chance to see him clearly. She was not the only one sizing him up. The other instructors who were just seeing him for the first time also did the same. Gray also sized them up. He was most curious about Delia though, since she was too young to be an instructor from his point of view. He saw the always serious-looking Lin, a well-refined man with brown hair, the beautiful Delia who was flowing with the spirit of youth, a middle-aged lady with blue hair, and a man who had a masculine body with rough-looking black hair. The rough-looking one is definitely the head instructor of the Earth Hall, Gray thought when he saw the man. When Blake saw how they were all sizing each other up, he introduced each of the instructors to Gray. When Blake introduced the head instructor of the Earth Hall, Gray was surprised by the one Blake was pointing at. Maybe he made a mistake. This was what rang in Gray's mind. You're also an Earth Elementalist, very good. You should try visiting the Earth Hall. Although your talent for the Earth element isn't as high as it is for the lightning element, the Earth element is very formidable. The head instructor of the Earth Hall, Michael said. I will surely do. Since I was focused entirely on cultivation, I haven't had time. Gray replied gently. He was surprised the one who spoke to him wasn't the rough-looking man, rather it was the refined-looking man. The head instructor of the Earth Hall had brown hair which was starting to gray, with a well-chiseled face and amber eyes which glittered with youthful mischief. Gray was surprised by Michael's appearance. He thought all Earth Elementalists were crude-looking. He didn't expect the refined-looking man to actually be the head instructor of the Earth Hall. He even looked better than Blake, although older. Michael saw Gray's weird look and laughed. What, you expected me to look crude? Gray smiled awkwardly. Sorry, it's just the few Earth Elementalists I've seen were all crude looking. The instructors all laughed when they heard this. Michael has already gotten used to getting this reaction from people the first time to know he was an Earth Elementalist. Due to the rough nature of the Earth element, most Earth Elementalists looked crude. The elements usually reflects on the Elementalist, so it is not surprising most Earth Elementalists looks crude. Most Wind Elementalists look nimble, while Fire Elementalists almost always has a fiery personality. Okay, now back to the reason we are all gathered today, Blake said solemnly after the bout of laughter. The office once again went calm, with everyone focusing their gazes intently at Gray. Chapter 30. Gray walked closer to Blake with a calm expression. He knew he didn't have anything to worry about, so he wasn't worried. So, were you able to break through to the collection plane? Blake asked with little hope, although still slightly expectant. Being just at the collection plane, the elements won't be fully active in the body of the Elementalist. So although everyone present was already in a high plane, they wouldn't know without inspecting personally. Gray smiled and said, yes. When they all heard his answer, they were all astounded. They never thought he would have been able to do it. I was also able to break through another layer, Gray added unhurriedly. The instructors were all visibly surprised when they heard his first reply, but on hearing the second part of his words, they were stupefied. How's this possible? This was the only word resounding through their minds. Gray, this is not a joke. Are you certain of what you just said? Blake had to be sure. He thought Gray was saying this without any seriousness. Of course, Gray affirmed. He didn't know why they took it this way. You were the one who asked me. Why would I be joking with you? Gray thought, feeling wronged. Give me your hand. Blake stretched out his hand. Gray placed his hand on the outstretched hand of Blake. When his hand was placed on Blake's palm, he felt a mysterious energy going into his body. It was a strange feeling, as this was something he had never felt before. This must be what they call spiritual energy, Gray thought while feeling expectant. He thought of how it would feel like when he would also be able to use spiritual energy. After some time, Blake's expression changed drastically. Impossible, this. He stuttered with a voice filled with surprise. The other instructors looked at him with interest. Gray was also surprised by the sudden outburst from Blake. What is it? Lynn asked. She had never seen Blake like this before. Her curiosity was seriously piqued by it. Check it out yourself. Blake said as he passed Gray's hand over to her. She held Gray's hands and, just like Blake, sent her spiritual consciousness into his body. After thoroughly checking, she was also shocked by the findings, although her reaction was not as excessive as Blake's reaction. "You truly are a very lucky boy." Lynn looked at Gray with glittering eyes. Seeing the look from both Blake and Lynn, Gray was beginning to get curious about what was going on in his body. Not just him, but the other instructors were also getting curious. "What is going on?" Delia couldn't hold it back anymore and asked. She saw how Blake and Lynn acted. She got curious and wanted to know what happened. "He has a unique physique," Blake replied in a bland voice. Delia pouted when she heard how Blake replied her. When Blake saw her pouting, he was stunned and couldn't take his eyes off her. When Delia saw how Blake was staring at her intently, she quickly dropped her head down to avoid his gaze. Her lips curled upwards, with her face blooming with a radiant smile. Lynn cleared her throat to try to bring Blake back from his trance. When Blake's mind was clear, he felt awkward, realizing he was staring at Delia shamelessly. He thickened his skin and acted like nothing happened before explaining. "Well, it can't be referred to as a unique physique per se, but for some unknown reasons, his body has a high concentration of both lightning and earth elemental essence in it." Everyone in the office was surprised when they first heard Blake say the word unique physique, including Gray. Although Blake later clarified it wasn't a unique physique, rather it was a huge concentration of elemental essence. It was nevertheless a shocking thing to hear. For someone who just started cultivating, having a huge concentration of elemental essence was unheard of. Now they all understood what Lynn meant when she said he was very lucky, except for Gray. He still didn't understand what having such a high concentration of elemental essence. He threw a questioning gaze at Blake, clearly wanting him to explain further. "This simply means for the time being, your cultivation speed would be terrifyingly fast. We don't know when it will be used up, but from the amount you have, it should be able to get you to the arcane plane without any issues. And you'll also advance very fast," Lynn explained to Gray to clear up his doubts. Gray's mood turned sour when he heard this. "And here I was thinking I had hit the jackpot by having a unique physique. Who knew this was a miracle with an expiring date?" he complained grudgingly. But he couldn't hide the fact that he was also excited by the news. With this, he wouldn't have an issue with closing up the gap with his peers. Although not everyone his age is at the arcane plane, those with purple or blue talent were already in the arcane plane, except for the ones who weren't hardworking. "Well, with this, you wouldn't be far behind your peers, and you might have hope in participating in the yearly tournament at the academy," Blake said with a smile. He had already gotten over the initial shock, and with what happened when he lost himself looking at Delia, he wanted to talk as much as possible, hoping to take everyone's mind off it. "What's the tournament all about?" Gray inquired. "Students from each hall will get together and have a little combat with each other to determine how far they had grown. This is done every year, although not compulsory," Blake calmly explained. "The academy always has an end-of-year tournament to see who the best student is for each class, although not all students participate." When Gray heard the tournament was not mandatory and he could skip it, he was glad, since he didn't have any interest in battling, and currently wanted to fully focus on increasing his plane. He planned on going into the forest to train with magical beasts when he got to the arcane plane. Only after reaching the arcane plane before the academy would allow any of the students to go out to train. The Class 3 students rarely participates in the tournament. Since Gray was already checked by Blake and it was already confirmed he was in the collection plane, he didn't have any reason staying at the office any longer, and opted to leave. When he got out of the office, he could hear Delia calling Blake a pervert. "What's up with those two anyway?" Gray asked himself as he walked out of the hall heading back to his house. On his way, he couldn't help but think of the reason why he had large amounts of lightning and earth elemental essence in his body. It must definitely be back at the Lightning Mountain, but how come my body was able to store it even though I haven't started cultivating? Gray was puzzled by everything, but he didn't dwell in it for too long. Since he couldn't find a reason for now, he'll just stop thinking about it. Besides, it wasn't like it was something bad. Chapter 31. A youth could be seen sitting cross-legged on top of a boulder with his chest bare. He had a well-chiseled body, which was a clear sign of training his body frequently. After some time, the youth breathed in deeply and stood up. The youth stood at 5'9" in height, with a slender body and fair skin, which looked like that of a baby. When he raised his face, a stunningly handsome face could be seen. He had short black hair and an inverted triangular-shaped face with beautiful black eyes. The youth was precisely Gray. It had already been 1 year since he got into the Lunar Academy, and he can say, it had been an amazing experience so far. He had not only started cultivating, but he had broken through to the 9th stage of the fusion plane with this 1 year. The entire academy was shocked from how fast he advanced in his cultivation. This was by far the fastest anyone had ever broken through in the entire academy. One has to remember that there was a penalty if the students didn't break through from the collection plane to the fusion plane within a year, but Gray not only broke through to the fusion plane, he was already at the peak of it. I should be able to break through to the arcane plane within a week, Gray said with emotions. He could still remember how he was still being mocked 1 year ago, but currently, he had already almost caught up with his peers. It usually takes those with purple talent almost 3 years to break through to the arcane plane, while those with blue talents at least 1 year and 8 months. But Gray had already defied all logic for the students, that is, the higher-ups in the academy were all aware of the reason. During this 1 year, Gray had attended class in both the Lightning and Earth Hall, although not much. He focused fully on his cultivation. Since this will be used up, it's best I make fast work of it. This was his thoughts whenever he remembers he has a huge amount of elemental essence in his body, which was slowly dwindling away. Gray was scared the essence would suddenly disappear, so he wanted to use it as fast as possible. He had also been able to upgrade his grave for his earth element. This further increased his cultivation speed by a little. The academy tournament is probably going on right now. Gray looked in the direction of the academy. Blake had tried persuading him several times to take part in the tournament, but he refused every time. Russell. Gray heard the sound of leaves moving coming from his west. He turned his head, looking at the direction with an interested look. He calmly listened to know the distance the noise was coming from. After confirming where the noise came from, he walked towards the direction with caution. Although he was curious, he wasn't stupid enough to charge there with knowing what was making the sound. 50 meters away from him, 2 magical beasts were in an intense fight. One was already lightly injured, but had no thoughts of stopping, because if it stops resisting, it will surely be killed by one attacking it. A boar and a cat-like creature were brawling fiercely. The boar was in the defensive, but it also counter-attacked if the chance presents itself. The cat-like creature was very nimble and was moving like the wind, hard to predict. The boar tried its best to hit the cat, but the cat was too agile for it. Each of the beasts stood at a height of 40 inches and 33 inches respectively, with the cat being the smaller of both. Gray climbed a tree 14 meters above the ground and watched them closely. The cat is most likely a magical beast with wind affinity, he guessed. It wasn't hard to figure out seeing the quick movements of the cat. But what caught most of Gray's attention was the boar. Its defense was terrifyingly hard to break through. The cat had tried multiple times, but it was unable to cause any harm. After another 3 minutes of fruitless struggle, the cat finally gave up on the boar and disappeared into the trees. It was already most likely getting exhausted from the endless attacks it was dishing out. The boar wasn't overly exhausted, since it placed most of its time on defending. "Boar it is then," Gray said with a smile. Since he saw the boar, the only he thought about was cooking it. He had even planned on stealing the kill, if the cat was able to defeat the boar, who knew it was so weak. Gray had already turned into a master hunter during his 1 year here. He hunts frequently here, although the beasts here aren't too strong, with most of them being at the collection plane and few being at the fusion plane. Gray speculated the boar broke through to the fusion plane recently. He could already smell the sweet aroma of the meat. He almost started salivating just staring at the boar. After seeing it was all alone, the boar lowered its guard. This was the best time for Gray to make his sneak attack. The boar wouldn't expect to be sneak attacked by someone after just fending off the cat. Gray silently edged closer to the boar without it realizing. Because of training his body to a high degree, he had perfect control over it. He took out a stone-carved knife which he made for himself. Stupid ruleless, Gray cursed in his mind. He had asked for a knife from Blake, but he was rejected. Blake said all students below the arcane plane are not allowed to wield weapons in the academy. Gray was frustrated by the rule, and almost cursed out in the presence of Blake. After reaching his striking range, he calmed himself. Gray sprang out as fast as the cat, aiming his knife at the skull of the boar. Thud. The sound of something hitting the ground resounded in the area. The boar fell down lifelessly with blood flowing out the back of its head. Gray's sneak attack was alarmingly effective. He was like a well-seasoned hunter biding his time before giving a fatal strike. The boar didn't even get a chance to raise its defense. Gray had a huge smile on his face as he picked up his dinner before heading back to the academy to prepare his meal. Chapter 32. Soon, the sweet smell of roasted boar permeated the entire compound. Gray's cooking had gotten better since he started living alone. If Mom were here, she would have definitely praised my cooking. Gray smiled when he thought of his mother. It's already been so long, yet I haven't heard anything. Gray had missed her during this year he had stayed at the academy. Due to the distance, he couldn't go back since it would take a long time for him to get there. If only I had an aerial beast. Gray thought of the griffin which brought him here. I would have been able to go back and check if she's still around. Martha told him she would be going over to meet up with his father. She refused to tell him where he was. She only told him she'd find a way to contact him when she was gone. It had already been a year, but he had heard nothing from her. While Gray was still reminiscing, an unexpected guest walked into his house without even knocking. When the man walked in, the only thing he had his eyes on was the boar which was currently being cooked by Gray. Due to Gray's high training and high attainment in meditation, he could be said to have a strong sense of vigilance. He could clearly sense something over 100 meters away from him, but surprisingly, someone was within 10 meters of his sensory range, yet he failed to pick up on the person. There are only two possibilities which could have caused this. Either he wasn't as good as he thought, or the person who intruded was just too good. From the way the man walked in, one could see he was walking in a very leisure manner. What a great aroma, the man said while strongly breathing in. Gray was startled when he heard a voice coming from behind him, and scurried to his feet, getting into a defensive stance. He couldn't believe someone got so close to him without him even noticing. "What are you jumping for?" the man asked with a confused voice. He clearly didn't expect Gray to react like a scared rabbit. "Senior, it's you," Gray said with a stunned voice. Surprisingly, the man in front of him was the same person who brought him to the academy. "Of course it's me. Do you see anyone else?" Chris chuckled. "But how did you get in?" Gray asked. "Through the door, obviously," Chris responded while still staring intently at the meat. Gray's mind was still trying to comprehend what was happening. He clearly remembered closing the door. He should have heard the sound of Chris opening it, since it always makes a creaking sound when opening it. Forget it, luckily it was him. I really need to be more alert, Gray thought while sighing at his negligence. He thought it was his carelessness that made him not sense Chris entering the compound and getting so close to him. He totally forgot there were people who could easily sneak up on you. "Senior, you didn't watch the tournament." Gray didn't expect Chris to be here, since most of the instructors were watching the tournament. "Tournament? What tournament?" Chris asked while furrowing his brow, trying to recall if he heard about this tournament Gray was talking about. Gray was astounded by Chris's reply. "The Academy's yearly tournament," he added. Chris made an expression of suddenly recalling something. "Oh, that it's today?" he asked. When Gray heard his question, he knew Chris was definitely a lost cause. Is he even an instructor here? Gray thought, clearly puzzled by Chris' lack of information. "Yes, senior, the tournament is today." "Okay," Chris replied with indifference, clearly not interested in it. Gray noticed since he saw Chris, he hadn't even thrown a glance at him. The only thing he was staring at was the meat. Gray was certain he could see some drool coming out from the side of Chris's mouth. "At least try to keep your image as a senior. And where has he been over the year?" Gray complained in his heart. Since Chris dumped Gray with Klaus, he had not appeared until now. Gray had asked of him from Klaus, but didn't get any positive responses. So he just thought maybe Chris wasn't present at the academy. "Why don't you stay for dinner? I'm almost done preparing it," Gray asked, trying to buy some face for this so-called senior of his. Good, you're truly a nice young man." Chris repeated "good" twice just to show his delight while nodding like a bird pecking grains. Gray facepalmed in his mind. When he saw how Chris was acting, he remembered the time they traveled together, and how much Chris loved food. After dinner, Gray couldn't stop staring at Chris. He was shocked by how much Chris could eat. The body isn't supposed to contain that much food, he exclaimed in his heart. Oh, Chris threw a glance at Gray before making a surprised sound. You're already at the peak of the fusion plane, he added. Yes, I'm close to breaking through to the arcane plane, Gray said with a gleeful smile. He just noticed after being here for so long, thought Gray. That's good. I heard you have a high concentration of elemental essence in your body. Chris smiled while asking. Yes, this was what enabled me to advance this quickly, Gray said. I was also given a better cultivation technique than the one the other kids used. I think this also added to my speed, Gray said further. Wait, you still think you were given a better technique? Chris blurted out with surprise. What? Gray exclaimed when he heard this. Nothing, Chris said, clearly not planning on saying anything more. Could it be that the technique I was given wasn't better than the ones the other kids received from the library? He wasn't dumb from Chris' reaction. He could tell something was wrong, and Chris knew about it. He thought Chris wasn't in the academy, but clearly, Chris had been keeping tabs on him. I will be going now. Chris stood up and prepared to leave. Oh, and after breaking through to the arcane plane, tell Blake to bring you to me, he said before leaving. Gray just stared at him, his mind still on what Chris said. I'll head over to the library tomorrow, he declared. Chapter 33. The next day, Gray was about to head over to the library to check out the technique given to new students. Hey Gray! Gray turned around at the sound of the voice. He already knew the owner of the voice. Hey Klaus. He greeted Klaus. Where are you headed? Klaus asked. He was on his way over to Gray's place. I'm on my way to the library, Gray replied. Great. I was also about to head there, Klaus said and joined Gray. So, how was the tournament? Gray asked as they started walking. Klaus mused for some time before replying, not bad actually. Unfortunately, I was unable to make it into the top 8. The competition was fierce. Oh, which hall's student was the champion for Class 3? Gray asked. The champion of Class 3 can't be said to be from one hall. She is a dual elementalist with blue and orange grade for each element, Klaus said with an expression which showed he was still thinking about the events that played out yesterday. Yes, the champion is a girl. You should have heard of her. She's also a student of the Lightning Hall, Klaus said while looking at Gray. You mean Alice? Gray raised a brow. Yes, that's her, Klaus confirmed. Are you sure we're talking about the same person? The Alice I know is a sweet, cute girl. She doesn't seem like someone who would enjoy fighting, Gray said, thinking maybe there was a difference between the Alice Klaus was talking about and the one he knew. Is there any other Alice in the Lightning Hall Class 3? Klaus asked, exasperated. Well, no, Gray thought for some time before replying. Don't be deceived by her cute look. When she's in the arena, she's as fierce as a tiger. Luckily I didn't encounter her, Klaus said with a relieved sigh. This was the only reason he wasn't upset when he was eliminated from the tournament. The person who advanced after defeating him went on to face Alice. I can still hear his screams. Klaus shivered when he remembered the fight. Although the academy doesn't entertain students getting hurt in the tournament, the same can't be said for the rules of the Class 3 students. The rule there was to ensure you do not attack an opponent. When you clearly see he can't fight back, try to be as lenient as you can and no killing. Once a student admits defeat, the battle must stop immediately. The academy believes if the students don't go through tough battles now, they wouldn't stand a chance outside. And since most of the Class 3 students have to do missions, they need as much fighting experience as possible. Klaus went on to tell Gray everything that happened at the tournament. When Gray heard of how Alice ran through all her opponents, he couldn't help but sweat profusely when he thought of how he mocks her when they were together. She knows I'm only joking. But what if she suddenly attacks me someday? Gray thought with fright. Alice was one of the few female friends he had in the academy. She had an easygoing personality and could be seen almost always smiling. Gray couldn't picture her with the description Klaus was giving. She wasn't breathtakingly beautiful, but she could be classified as above average in terms of beauty. She had a cute round face with big eyes, which totally made her stand out in a good way. The only downside was she had a small stature. Although she was already 17, she could still be misjudged for a 13 years old due to her small physique. This was what Gray used to make fun of her whenever they were together. She's that strong. Luckily I'm friends with her. He knew if he wasn't her friend, she would have definitely dealt with him. No wonder Reynolds and the rest always gives me weird looks whenever I'm making fun of her, Gray thought, feeling lucky. They continued discussing the tournament. Before they knew it, they were already at the library. The library was divided into 2 buildings. Both were 3-story buildings. Gray had visited the library, but he had always gone to the one which had information on the history of their continent, and also magical beasts. Gray had never visited the library which housed techniques, mostly because students under the arcane plane didn't have access to upper floors. They could only go as far as the 1st floor, which contained the basic cultivation technique and some training manuals. When Klaus noticed Gray heading over to the technique building, he was surprised. Although Gray frequented the library, it was only the building which contains information. He had never once gone to this other building. Gray, you're heading over to the technique building? Klaus asked with surprise. Yes, I've decided to check it out after being in the academy for so long now. Gray scratched his head as he replied with an embarrassed smile. After all, being in the academy and not visiting this particular building was somewhat embarrassing. Even if you're not here for the technique, at least check it out once. After entering the building, Klaus asked if Gray needed any help, but was politely declined. Klaus said goodbye to Gray and headed towards the upper floor. Gray watched him leave before looking at the bookshelf arranged in rows. They are arranged in the same pattern, Gray thought as he walked closer. This building was arranged just like the other one, the only difference was the details the scrolls contained. He started searching for the cultivation technique. He heard there was only this technique in the academy for students below the arcane plane. He quickly found it on row 3. He opened the scroll calmly and studied it. He had already memorized the technique he was given to by Blake, so he knew it like the back of his hands. On seeing the technique, he realized that it wasn't different from the one he was given under special treatment. Shit, I was scammed. Gray cursed out loud. The few students at the library all looked at him wondering why he was talking this loud. Gray stared around after realizing his mistake. He placed the scroll back on the bookshelf and went outside. He was pretty annoyed by the fact that someone tricked him just after entering the academy. If I weren't lucky to have had a huge amount of elemental essence in my body, would they have kicked me out after 10 days? Gray thought to himself while heading in the direction of Blake's office. Gray stood at the door of the office looking at it profoundly before knocking. Blake's voice could be heard from inside. After Gray heard the affirmation from Blake to come in, he opened the door and went in. When Blake saw him, he knew he wasn't in his usual jovial self. "What's wrong with you today?" Blake asked with concern. "I just went over to the library," Gray hinted. "So?" Blake asked, clearly not understanding why Gray was telling him he went to the library. "And I saw the same technique you said was better than the one at the library," Gray said. "Oh, that, well, they suddenly changed all the techniques to that one, since they didn't want to give you too much of an advantage over the rest students." Blake lied through his teeth. Gray was surprised by Blake's lie. Before leaving the library, he had asked if that had been the technique all new students received. But now, Blake was telling him something else. Gray was stunned by how quickly Blake came up with the lie, or had he prepared it beforehand? Gray asked himself. "I asked around, and they said it was the same technique from years ago." Gray exposed Blake. Blake looked at him before sighing. "Well, you finally found out." But after saying this, Blake didn't add anything else. "Don't I at least deserve an explanation?" Gray asked. "No," Blake replied while fiddling his thumbs. "Why?" Gray asked again. But Blake's reason almost made him faint. "Because I'm the instructor," Blake replied with a small chuckle. Gray stayed for a while, but couldn't get anything from Blake, not even an apology for tricking him. Instead, Blake told him to thank him because the pressure was what made Gray grow at a faster pace. He couldn't deny he was right though, but still, being tricked was no fun. How shameless. Gray complained as he left the office. Chapter 34. 3 days had passed since Gray found out he was using the same technique as the rest of the students. Although it was depressing, it wasn't without its advantages. Due to having the mindset of using a better technique and also his hard work, he was able to advance quickly. The elemental essence in his body was like an added bonus. Gray was currently sitting cross-legged next to flowing waters. Listening to the murmurs of the water, He naturally entered a meditative trance, and all the lightning and earth elemental particles were moving into his body. Splash, splash. The flowing water murmured unceasingly. Lightning and earth elemental particles entered his body through his 4 limbs, as his flesh, bones, and organs slowly absorbed nourishment from the essence. Slowly but surely, the strength of his body continued to rise. After some time, a change started taking place in his body. "I'm about to break through," Gray said with a grin. The biggest change was the awakening of his spiritual energy. It was a strange feeling. It felt like something was forming inside his head, but the process was painless. Gray felt like he could see even when his eyes were closed. He could clearly sense everything within a 100-meter radius from him. He saw inside his body and saw the elemental essence which was in his body. When he saw the amount of elemental essence left in his body, he was stunned. Shit, it's already finished. Gray felt sad. He would advance at a slower pace. Now, he could sense the elements more clearly in the air. Cultivation would now be faster than when he was in the fusion plane. The essence needed for every stage breakthrough in the arcane plane was almost what was needed for the breaking through 5 stages in the fusion plane. Gray felt stronger after this breakthrough. Now his real training had begun. He could now head out for missions in the academy. The academy only allows students of the arcane plane to take missions. Most of the missions involves hunting down magical beasts and searching for herbs in the forest. Gray had waited for so long to get some real fighting experience. Although there were magical beasts at this forest, the academy always eliminates any beast above the 3rd stage of the fusion plane for the safety of the students. Magical beasts in the arcane plane are tougher to deal with, because unlike those in the collection and fusion plane, they could do long-ranged attacks. With the addition of their strong defenses, they are very hard to deal with. Gray settled his raging emotions. This year had been like a dream for him. Senior Chris said I should come see him after breaking through to the arcane plane. Seems like he has something for me, Gray said expectantly. Since it was still midday, he could still go meet Blake. Gray left the forest and headed towards the academy. When he got to Blake's office, he noticed Blake wasn't inside. On his way back home, he saw Reynolds. "Hey, Ray?" Gray called out to Reynolds. Reynolds turned on hearing his name. When he saw it was Gray, he flashed a smile which quickly disappeared. "Gray, why didn't you attend the tournament? ? I know you didn't want to participate in it, but you should have at least come to cheer up your bro." Reynolds immediately questioned Gray after the initial smile. Gray had an embarrassed smile. "I planned on coming, but suddenly felt like I would be able to break through. So continued training. I never expected not to be able to," Gray explained. Reynolds was about to continue scolding him when he noticed a change. He paused and studied Gray closely. "You've broken through?" Reynolds asked to confirm if his speculations were right. "Yes, I only just broke through. I came to see Instructor Blake, but he isn't in his office," Gray replied with a smile. He felt happy inside, since he has been able to close the gap with almost all his peers. Although he's not as strong as them, he isn't too far behind anymore. "That's amazing. Your cultivation speed is the fastest I've ever seen. How do you cultivate so fast? At this rate you'll not only be able to catch up, but you'll also be able to surpass us," Reynolds praised wholeheartedly. Gray smiled without giving any reply. "Oh, you said you came to see Instructor Blake?" Reynolds asked. "Yes, but he isn't in his office. I'll come over tomorrow," Gray responded. "I know where he is." Reynolds gave a cheeky smile. "You do?" Gray raised a brow when he saw the smile. He knew something was definitely up with how Reynolds was smiling. "Yes, he's at the waterhole," Reynolds continued. "Is something going on there?" Gray started getting curious. "You know Instructor Delia, right?" Reynolds didn't answer his question, but asked a question instead. "Yes," Gray nodded. "She went out for a mission and was attacked by elementalists from the Starlight Academy." Reynolds told Gray what he heard. The previous day, they saw Instructor Blake furiously charging out of his office. When they asked around, they found out an instructor from the water hall was attacked by someone from the Starlight Academy. The elementalists from the Starlight Academy attacked her because they found a treasure and wanted to monopolize it for themselves. She helped in fighting the beast which was guarding the place, yet she was sneak attacked by one of them. She was lucky to have survived. When Blake found out, he charged over to the Starlight Academy. and almost killed the man who attacked her. The other instructors who were with the man joined hands, but they still couldn't defeat him. Only after the principal arrived did Blake let the matter go. The entire empire was shocked by the news. It had only been a day, yet it had already spread around the entire empire. When Gray heard what happened, he was dumbstruck. He never expected Blake to be this strong. The higher-ups of the Starlight Academy were furious when they saw this. The principal stopped them from attacking him. He knew there was a terrifying existence in the Lunar Academy. Even the Emperor wouldn't want to offend. Although they were the publicly acclaimed #1, he knew just how strong the overall strength of the Lunar Academy is. For him to charge over to the Starlight Academy all by himself and almost killing the man showed just how strong he was. If not for the principal personally making an appearance, then it's most likely he would have killed the man. That's how a man should act, Gray said with emotion. Chapter 35. The entire empire was rocked by the news. They always had the notion that the Starlight Academy were the strongest. So for a single instructor from the Lunar Academy to charge over to the academy, and even almost killing an instructor, was a surprise. What shocked the people more was the fact that the principal of the Starlight Academy let him go scot-free. It was like a slap to his face. They were waiting patiently for more chaos to ensue, because they believed the matter won't end like this. Back at the Lunar Academy, in a room in the teacher's living area. "What you did was rash," a soft voice said. "I couldn't just let him go like that. What if he had killed you?" The voice of a man rebutted strongly. Anger was slightly visible in his voice. "She's right, Blake. You shouldn't have just charged over without notifying us. What if it escalated more than this?" A stern voice reprimanded also. "To hell with them. If it's war they want, we're not afraid of them." Another voice filled with anger spoke up abruptly. "For once I agree with this hothead here. If it's war they want, we aren't afraid of them." A serene voice could also be heard. The people gathered here were the head instructors of each hall, along with the injured Delia, who was lying on a bed. Delia looked at Blake and stopped speaking. She knew his personality very well. Once he's angered, he wouldn't think of the repercussions of his actions. Although he's cool-headed some of the time, he mostly acts according to his emotions. "We should try to resolve this peacefully. You should know the Empire is at odds with the Azure Empire. The Emperor will certainly not allow for there to be any internal strife in the Empire." Kyla, the head instructor of the Water Hall, said. When the rest heard this, they all nodded in approval to what she said. The Azure continent was ruled by the 4 major empires, which are the Killen Empire, Azure Empire, Stellar Empire, and the Blue Wind Empire. The continent was divided into 5 parts, with each empire occupying one. The last part was the mysterious magical beasts forest. It is a land of fortune, but also a land of death. Those who are lucky venture into the forest and come back more powerful than they were. The people who have ventured inside and met lucky encounters almost always turn out to be major powerhouses in the continent. Not everyone who returns finds fortuitous encounters though. Some head into the forest in groups numbering over 10, but only a scant few would return. In some cases, none of the adventurers returns. With each empire balancing each other, none have been able to claim total superiority over them, so they just settled for their territories. Fights do break out between the empires, but it rarely extends into an all-out war. The Azure Empire and the Killen Empire have never agreed for a long time now. If not for the fear of the other empires, they would have already had an all-out war multiple times. The Killen Empire broke out from the Azure Empire after a huge war which took place hundreds of years ago. This was what also gave rise to the other 2 empires. The Azure Empire used to be the only empire at that time, but due to revolt from some of the citizens and a betrayal, the empire's power started dwindling. This was the reason the Azure Empire hated the Killen Empire greatly. But a war would be detrimental to both empires, so they're keeping themselves in check. Each wouldn't mind capitalizing on an opportunity if found. The current struggle which might take place between the Lunar and the Starlight Academy will definitely be to the advantage of the Azure Empire. If the Azure Empire decides to launch an all-out attack, both the Lunar and the Starlight Academy will be focused on their own battles. This will cause a major drop in the overall power of the Empire. The Stellar and the Blue Wind Empire have always kept a neutral stance this entire time, but no one knew what they were planning. "Fine, I'll let this matter rest for now," Blake said with a cold voice. Killing intent could still be felt leaking out from his eyes. Delia glanced at him before sighing helplessly. What do you mean you'll let the matter rest? You've already caused a huge disturbance at the Starlight Academy. A voice suddenly spoke up. The others turned around to see a middle-aged man walking into the room. Principal, they said in unison. The man who walked in was the principal of the Lunar Academy. He was also the mayor of Lunar City, Oliver. Oliver nodded and studied the injured Delia for some time, before shifting his gaze towards Blake. Blake, I see you're still as hot-headed as usual, Oliver said with a carefree smile. When Blake saw that smile, he felt a chill down his spine. He was very familiar with Oliver and knew when he was angry or in a good mood. Not at all, Principal. It's just I couldn't allow them to step on our instructors, Blake explained with a shrinking voice. Blake expected punishment for what he did. Oliver has always been the type who liked avoiding trouble at all costs. People always thinks he has a weak personality. Only those close to him knows just how terrifying he can be. Oliver had a fiery temper when he was young. There was a time when he was offended by a clan while he was on a mission. He nearly wiped out the entire clan due to his temper. It caused a huge stir back then. Since then, he has always tried to keep his temper in check. Feed her this. It should help with her injuries. Oliver handed a tonic over to Blake before leaving. Don't worry about the outcome of what you did. I'll settle it. Oliver's voice echoed in the room even after he had left. Blake stared at the departing Oliver, before staring at the tonic in his hands. You should drink this. Blake placed the tonic close to Delia. He stared at her for a while before heading towards the door. We should let her rest, Michael suggested. They all nodded their heads in approval before leaving Delia alone. Delia just stared at the ceiling after they were gone. Some minutes later, she heard sounds of footsteps. Blake walked back into the room. How come you're back so soon? Delia asked when she saw it was Blake. I came to ensure you take the tonic, Blake said calmly. Dummy, Delia said with a smile. What a silly excuse. She felt happy inside at the thought of Blake returning. Blake didn't respond to her comment and just sat close to her. Chapter 36. It has been 4 days since the incident of Blake charging to the Starlight Academy occurred. Although there has been no major event, the people believed it was the calm before a storm. The Starlight Academy has always had a tyrannical attitude. If not for Blake being so strong, it wouldn't have ended the way it did. Lunar Academy. Gray was heading in the direction of the mission hall. He was now qualified to take on missions, since he had broken through to the arcane plane. He had gone over to Blake's office over the past 4 days, but he still wasn't around. He decided he would take on some missions to increase his experience. Although he usually spars with Klaus and Reynolds, there was a difference between sparring and a real battle. After breaking through to the arcane plane, Gray got some unexpected surprise when he went into the chaos space. He noticed with the awakening of his spiritual energy, he could sense the elements more clearly like it was in the real world. This will enhance his ability to improve his grade, which will in turn further increase his cultivation speed. That was not the only surprise he got from the chaos space. He also got the method on fusing elements. But he hadn't tried it since he got it. If it's not done properly, there was danger involved. He also got a cultivation technique from it, which was better than the one he got from the academy. His elemental essence is much more thicker than when he first used the one the academy provided. After breaking through to the arcane plane, his speed was not only faster in gathering elemental essence in his body, the essence not only got purer, it was also thicker than the previous one. Gray had already visited the library twice to check out techniques. He took 2 home to learn, which were a movement technique and a defensive technique. Students were only allowed to take 1 scroll out of the library, except for dual elementalists, which were privileged to take 2. The student must return the scroll 10 days after collection. Only after returning the one you collected can you collect a second one. But most students prefer to master the technique they were practicing before going for a new one. The name of the movement technique was Lightning Steps. This technique enables the elementalist to channel lightning essence around his feet to form something like a boot, giving the user a burst of speed. The distance you can cover depends solely on the elementalist and the elemental essence in the body. An elementalist could decide to do a short burst while fighting. This can give him an edge over his opponent because of the quick change in his speed. The elementalist can also focus fully on escaping. This is where the amount of essence in the body comes in. The defensive technique he took was a basic earth technique, earth wall. This technique allows the elementalist to form a protective wall around himself. The earth element is truly the strongest defensive element. Gray practiced those techniques for 2 days. After making small progress in it, he decided to return them and check out offensive techniques. He took 1 lightning and also 1 earth offensive technique. The lightning technique was called Thunder Gloves. The technique involves coating the hands with lightning to attack. It's a close combat technique. The earth technique was called Shattered Rocks. It's a long-range attack. Although Gray preferred close combat due to his training, having an added attack option was good. Gray had stayed at the academy for over a year now, so he decided it was time to head out. He had gone out of the academy over the year, but it was only to visit Luna City with Klaus. Since Klaus was from the city, he often frequents it, but most of his attention was on his training. After entering the mission hall, he went over to the side of the hall designated for students in the arcane plane. The hall was divided into 3 parts. The right side was for the students in the arcane plane, the one in the middle was for students in the origin plane, and the one in the left is for the overlord plane. The academy only have a few students in the origin plane. These students rarely stayed in the academy. Once a student breaks through to the origin plane, they can decide if they want to graduate or still continue staying at the academy. Most of them decides to return, while some of them choose to stay. Some also decide to become instructors in the academy, but you would need to break through past the mid stages of the origin plane. Just like the case of Delia, after breaking through to the origin plane, she chose to stay and became an instructor at the academy. Each part had students who were assigned to hand out missions to students who wanted to do it. There were 17 missions available to students in the early stages of the arcane plane. After glancing through all the missions, Gray decided to go with the one which he felt he could handle. "Hello, I would like to take the 8th mission," Gray said to the young man sitting behind the desk. The youth glanced at him before going through the scrolls in his desk. After locating the mission scroll, he handed it over to Gray. "This mission was posted 3 days back. You have 2 weeks to return with the required item." He took the mission which Gray took off the board, after handing the scroll over to Gray. Each mission has a time range on them. The student were required to finish the mission with the recommended time. Okay. Gray registered his name and left with the scroll. Gray studied the scroll. The mission he took was to bring back 3 eggs of a red lizard. It was the breeding season of these lizards, and they could be found in the Misty Mountain. Red lizards are fire attributes magical beasts, and a fully grown red lizard is usually around the early stages of the arcane plane. Gray headed towards the academy's weaponry. Since he was already in the arcane plane, and was going out for a mission, it was time for him to choose a weapon. Chapter 37. The weaponry was located west of the library. Before long, Gray got to a 1-story building. There was an instructor at the door of the building, who first confirms the identity and plane of a student before they are allowed entry into the building. The instructor was seated bored as usual. Only a few students like using weapons, since weapons were mostly used for close combat fights. He raised his brow when he noticed someone was headed in the direction of the building. "Hello, I would like to select a weapon," Gray said with an amiable smile. "Oh, your ID." The instructor gave a surprised sound before asking for his ID. Gray brought out his student ID and gave it to him. After confirming it, he checked Gray's plane using his spiritual energy to guarantee if he had reached the requirements. "Okay, you can head in now. You're only allowed to choose 1 weapon," he said while handing Gray his student ID. Gray kept the ID before he walked past the instructor and opened the door. Gray stared at the weapons for some time before slowly walking in. "I think I'll go with a dagger," thought Gray. He had already gotten used to using his stone-carved dagger, so he thought since he was getting a weapon, he should go for one he was already familiar with. Amongst the numerous weapons in the building, swords numbered in the majority. There were several hundreds types of swords. The dagger rack was situated close to the sword rack. Gray's gaze meticulously swept through each and every type of dagger. After going through them, he decided to check out the sword rack, since he didn't find any dagger to his liking. His gaze was immediately attracted to a pair of short blades, hung by the side of the sword rack. The blades were hung criss-crossed on the wall. Gray walked closer to the blade and felt the scabbard, before unsheathing one of the blades. He studied the blade momentarily. The total length of the blade was 56 centimeters. Its handle blade was 16 centimeters, and it was made from metal. It had a nice grip. There were stars engraved on the blade, which also gave it a nice look. It was very sharp. The scabbard was made with strong leather, and it had 3 straps on the back, which can be attached to a belt. After careful studying it, Gray decided he was taking the short blade, since it was like a dagger, only longer. He took both blades before heading out of the building. When he exited the building, he went over to the instructor to register the weapon he collected. On seeing Gray coming out with the short blades, the instructor was greatly surprised. Elementalists rarely used weapons, and when they do, they always used weapons which had a long reach, like the spear, halberd, sword, bows. But Gray chose a short blade, which will mean he would need to get within a very close range before using. Although there were techniques which can be used with weapons, he didn't think Gray had access to them. "I'll take these," said Gray while showing the blades to the instructor. "Are you sure?" asked the instructor. "Yes." Gray nodded with a smile. "Okay." The instructor registered the blade before giving it back to Gray. Gray happily took the blade and returned to his house. He planned on getting familiar with the blade before he leaves tomorrow. Short blades are a class of bladed weapons which trade reach and power for speed. The blade can slash, hack, stab, cut, gouge, slice, parry, is flexible, and easy to control. Furthermore, it is easy to learn and easy to train. A blade's flexibility, ability to attack and defend, and ease in learning and training were all traits other weapons simply could not match except for a sword. Gray started practicing with the blades immediately after getting home. Since this was the first time he was going to wield a weapon with both hands, he had to get accustomed to the basics before heading out. He held the blades in a reverse grip, with one hand positioned a little further than the other. He tried attacking with both hands and also defending. Although he was alone, it wasn't hard for him to practice with them. After countless tries, he was finally getting the hang of them. Now he could simultaneously use one blade to defend while attacking with the other. Well, he wouldn't know until he tries it out in battle. After practicing with the blades, he started practicing his elemental techniques. He would have to return the techniques before he heads out tomorrow. Gray could be regarded as a training maniac. Due to the intensity of his training schedule, he rarely has times to do other things because he has to train almost throughout the day. Gray went to bed early, since he would be going for a mission the next day. This was the first time he would have to journey alone. He can't help but feel excited because of it. He had stayed at Red City for most of the time before joining the Lunar Academy. The next morning, he got up filled with energy and prepared for his journey. He carried the short blades in a sheath strapped across his back, with the handle facing down. He picked up the small pouch which he saved all his money in. After counting, he noticed he didn't have enough to get a horse for his journey. Without a horse, it would take him almost 3 days to get to the Misty Mountain. "I should find a way to earn money while I'm out," Gray thought out loud while walking out of his building. He first headed towards the library to return the techniques, before heading towards the exit of the academy. Chapter 38. Gray walked out of the academy instead in the direction of Lunar City. After a brief moment of contemplation, he decided to head over to the city to have a meal before leaving. "Gray, wait up." Gray heard a voice calling him from behind. He turned and saw Klaus running in his direction. Klaus carefully examined Gray. "You're heading out?" asked Klaus. "Yeah, I'm going for a mission." Gray nodded. "Okay, I'm heading over to the city. Want to have a meal before leaving?" Klaus asked. He had gotten used to Gray's company while eating in the city, so whenever he wants to go, he always heads over to call him. One of the few things Gray never says no to was if you invited him for a meal. Klaus knew just how much Gray loved eating, and he also knew how great of a cook Gray was. "I was about to head there. Let's go then," Gray said with a grin. They walked together and talked about a variety of things, with Klaus doing most of the talking. Klaus was a very social person. Lots of people don't know his father is the mayor and principal of Lunar City and Lunar Academy. Klaus doesn't put on airs the son of a mayor of such a big city usually does. He has a carefree attitude and likes making new friends. The academy was very united, having little to no conflicts among the students. Although not all the students adhere to the unity of the academy due to competitiveness, they mostly try to keep the conflict as minimal as possible. After entering the city, they went to the restaurant they always eat at. After Gray came up with the idea of tasting the food from the different restaurants in the city, They finally found the one Gray felt served the most delicious meals. Since Gray was a great cook, Klaus didn't doubt his judgment when it came to the taste of food. They soon arrived in front of the restaurant. It was a magnificent restaurant with luxurious decorations, and on top of the entrance hung 2 words Silver Moon. It was a 2-story building, and the decorations were magnificent and luxurious. Anyone could sense an aristocratic aura from the place. They walked into the building and headed towards the 2nd floor. Only those who had high social backgrounds could enter the 2nd floor, but being students from the Lunar Academy, they were exceptions. Well, unless you can afford the meal, that is. Most of the tables in the 1st floor were occupied. When those seated at the tables noticed Gray and Klaus heading towards the 2nd floor, they all looked at them with envy. They must be students from Lunar Academy. Yes, don't you see how young they were? I heard the students from the Starlight Academy are planning on attacking students from the Lunar Academy. They're not that strong. If they were strong, how could a single instructor from the Lunar Academy cause a ruckus there and come back in one piece? They only know how to bully the weak. Different conversations started off with the arrival of Klaus and Gray. The main topic was still the matter of Blake charging over to the Starlight Academy. Gray and Klaus were already gone, so they didn't have a chance to hear what they were saying. On getting to the 2nd floor, the people present were fewer than that of the 1st floor. Gray picked a table closer to the window, and they headed over to take a seat. A waiter came over to serve them. Since they were regulars here, most of the waiters already knew them. After some time, their foods were prepared. Gray immediately dug into his food without any second thoughts. When Klaus saw this, he just smiled and shook his head while also following in Gray's footsteps. They were still eating when they heard movements from the stairs. Gray didn't bother to look since this was a restaurant and people came often. Gray, a young lady's voice called out. Gray was startled on hearing his name. When he raised his head, he saw Alice, Reynolds and 2 other students from the Lightning Hall walking in their direction. "Hey, Alice," Gray said while moving to the side to create space for her to sit. "You broke through to the arcane plane, and you didn't even bother to come see me." Alice pouted as she complained. "I'm sorry, after breaking through I had to search for Instructor Blake. Then, I also had to collect techniques from the library to train. I planned on coming to see you after returning from my trip." Gray apologized before explaining. "You're going for a mission?" Alice asked with a surprised look. "Yes, I wanted to go out and train myself," replied Gray. "Since you've broken through to the arcane plane, we can now start sparring," Alice said with an evil smile. Amongst the group, Alice was the one who enjoyed fighting more. When the rest heard her say sparring, they all looked at Gray with pitiful eyes. They knew just how terrifying she was. Gray shivered when he heard this. He still remembered what Klaus and Reynolds told him about the tournament. "Sure, we'll spar when I return," Gray said with a stiff smile. He couldn't deny her request, since she was still mad at him for not informing her after he broke through. "We went on a group mission, and we got ambushed by those cowards from the Starlight Academy," Reynolds said in a spiteful tone. "What?" Gray and Klaus exclaimed at the same time. Reynolds went on to tell them what happened. They went for a mission just outside the territory of Lunar City. There was a group of bandits who blocked the path of traveling merchants and extort money from them before they are allowed to pass. After several complaints, the Academy decided to deal with it. Since the bandits were only around the 2nd and 4th stage of the arcane plane, they set it as a mission for the students. Alice was already in the late stages of the arcane plane. She went with Reynolds and to rest in case there was a misinformation about the stages of the bandits. Luckily, they didn't need her intervention since the information was spot on. On their way back after completing their mission, they were ambushed by the students from Starlight Academy. Due to the sudden attack, they quickly fell on the defensive. Alice, being the strongest of the group, managed to deal a strong blow to the leader of the Starlight Academy. This gave them the chance to escape since they were outnumbered. Although they were ambushed, amazingly, they came out uninjured. "You should be careful when you head out," Alice said with concern. "Sure," Gray replied. "Besides, it's not like they'll know I'm a student of the Lunar Academy." Gray added, unlike them, he was still totally unknown to people outside the Academy. He can pretty much go anywhere without fear of being attacked by the students of the Starlight Academy. "You should still be careful. You know this is your first time heading out for a mission," Reynolds also warned. Gray nodded. but didn't take it to heart. Since he didn't plan on offending anyone, he would just go out for his mission and return after completing it. His main concern for this trip was how to make money. Chapter 39. Gray finished his meal and prepared to leave. Heading to the Misty Mountain on foot would take him about 3 days, so he planned on starting his journey as soon as possible. He said goodbye to his friends before leaving under their watchful gazes. He took out a map of the area. He had already mapped out his route. He would have to pass 4 cities before he could get to the Misty Mountain. The Misty Mountain was located northwest of the academy. He just had to follow the routes on the map, and he should be able to get there within 3 days. He started his journey and soon disappeared into the horizon. Tranquil City. Just as the name implies, this city was very calm, and not many people could be seen outside. Unlike most cities which were busy, this city was quiet, too quiet even. A youth could be seen walking through the door of an inn. He went over to the receptionist to take a room. Gray would need to cross 1 more city before he gets to Misty Mountain. This was the 2nd day since he left Lunar City. He was already almost totally broke. After paying for the room, he would only have enough for a meal in the morning. He even had to cut down the amount of food he usually eats, just so he could have some money left before reaching the mountain. He already had a plan for making money. He would hunt magical beasts and sell their cores for money. He heard the cores of magical beasts in the arcane plane fetches a good sum. The next morning, he had a meal with the last money with him before heading out. After going broke, he sought for a quicker route to the mountain. After studying the map, he found a route which led past the rocky canyons. He headed over to the direction of the canyon, since going through it would cut down the time needed to reach the mountain by nearly half. Once he gets to the mountain, his first objective was to hunt for a meal. Gray walked into the canyon in a dull state. He had never really felt the need of money, since he never really uses it, but now he was totally dependent on himself. He kept sighing at the thought of how poor he was. Gray suddenly stopped in his track and looked over his shoulder. He had already walked into the deeper parts of the canyon, and could most likely have reached the middle of it. He saw a group of 8 men walking in his direction with savage smiles. Some of them held metal batons, daggers, while others held swords. "Hand over all your money and scram," the man in front said haughtily. The rest of the group burst into laughter when their leader said this. They were amused by the fact that a youth would walk in this canyon all by himself. When they saw how Gray looked, they felt he was just a green youth who didn't have any experience. From his clothing, fair skin, and handsome appearance, he seemed like someone who was rich. "Bandits," Gray muttered in a voice only he could hear. He turned and observed the bandits clearly. He chuckled when he noticed their planes. The one at the front had the highest cultivation level among them, being at the 8th stage of the fusion plane. The rest of them were around the 5th and 3rd stage of the fusion plane. The leader immediately felt annoyed when he realized Gray was just staring at them without heeding to his command. "Seems like you're deaf," he said with a sneer. "Go get all his money and try to be nice. He ordered his men. When they heard him say nice, they once again laughed. 2 of them walked towards Gray with a wicked smile on their faces. "Kid, if you had listened to our boss, you would have been able to walk out of here in one piece," the one on the left said. He was wielding a dagger and had a scar just above his right eye. Gray didn't move from his spot and just stared at them as they edged closer. "What? You're so scared that you can't even move," the other one said with a big grin. The man on the right stretched out his left hand after getting close to Gray. He placed it on Gray's shoulder. "Boss, can I keep his blades?" one of the men with the leader said. "I'll check it out first," said the leader coldly. They continued their conversations before they were interrupted by sounds of something hitting the ground. Thud, thud. When the leader raised his face to check what made the sounds, he was stunned. The rest of the group already had their mouths agape, since they saw how Gray dealt with the 2 men who were sent to him. "What happened? Why are they on the floor?" the leader asked with a confused voice. He knew how strong those guys were since they were part of his squad. Although he could defeat them, it wouldn't be this fast. "Boss, one of them tried to explain but couldn't stop stuttering. "He what?" The leader roared in anger on seeing how flustered his men were. He knocked both of them out in seconds. "We didn't even see how he moved." Another was able to calm himself after their boss's shout. The leader stared at the man who spoke with a dazed look. Even though he was stronger than they were still able to see how he attacks. For them to say they didn't see how Gray attacked was shocking to say the least. But boss, he was able to easily defeat Jack and Dorian. One of the men said timidly, "Are you stupid?" It was because he attacked them suddenly so they were unable to react. Now go get him down. He must be taught a lesson. We're not people he can offend, he said with annoyance. Make sure he doesn't die, he added. When the rest of the group heard this, they felt what he said was logical. Although they didn't see how Gray attacked, they knew it wasn't something spectacular. Since both men only fell by his side, they were only shocked by the fact that Gray was able to defeat them. So after the initial shock, they calmed down and prepared for battle. They were all experienced fighters, so they knew just how to deal with him. Amongst the 5 men, 2 were wielding batons. The others dropped their weapons since the boss told them not to kill him. Gray calmly stared at them. Come, he roared in his heart. This was going to be his first battle, and he was exhilarated by it. Chapter 40. In the middle of the rocky canyons, Gray could be seen crossing blows with the bandits. He had moved from his previous spot over the course of the battle. At first, Gray was able to trade blows with the bandits. Since he trained his physique and enjoyed close combat, he decided to only use his fists during the first stages of the fight. Since the bandits were in the fusion plane, they could only attack in close range. The bandits had exceptional teamwork, so he quickly fell into a passive state. Gray tried to look for an opening to create space for himself, but due to the experience of the bandits, they didn't give him the chance to do that. With each attack enforced with their elements. FK, this is harder than I thought, Gray screamed in his head. He didn't expect to be put in such a difficult situation moments after the battle started. Since he didn't have a good mastery of his movement technique, he would need some time to use it. A time which the bandits clearly have no plans of giving him. How can he be so strong? One of the bandits said while attacking. They were surprised by Gray's abilities. Although he had been on the defensive since the battle started, he had still been able to evade most of the fatal strikes. With these abilities, he should at least be at the same stage as the boss, if not even higher. Another one exclaimed. The leader had been calmly watching the battle since it started, and he was astonished by how high Gray's realm was. Although he didn't know if Gray had broken through to the arcane plane, he knew Gray wouldn't be far from it. Shit. If you're all so tough, why don't you come at me one-on-one? Gray yelled after he was hit by a baton on his left hand. This is not a tournament, brat. The guy who hit him with a baton snickered. They all knew they were no match for Gray one-on-one. This was also the reason they didn't give him any chance to free himself from their barrage of attacks, when they noticed how strong he was. Damn, Gray cursed out loud while blocking a fist that was heading towards his face. Who hits the face of an opponent? Gray angrily yelled at the man who almost punched him in the face. If that blow had connected, Gray's face would have surely changed in looks. In the middle of yelling and curses, the brawl continued. As the fight went longer, the bandits realized something wasn't right. Gray was able to evade more of their attacks compared to when the battle just started. The leader of the gang was the first to notice this. His face immediately sank at the thought of how quickly Gray was getting better at fighting. At this rate, he'll be able to overpower them. If he does that, I won't be a match for him, he muttered to himself. He knew his strength clearly. There was no way he could free himself from the clutches of his men if they ganged up on him. End the battle quicker, he yelled towards his men. They had also realized the shocking changes that were happening as the fight progressed. Although Gray was getting better at fighting, it still didn't change the fact that he was still getting hit by the bandits. Bam! Gray was hit once more with the baton. He clenched his teeth in pain. I need to get out of this encirclement, thought Gray. If his body wasn't stronger, he would have already lost the ability to fight back. He came up with a plan that he decided to try out. Although the plan was going to be painful, it was better than staying closed up in this tight encirclement. His plan was simple, that was to trade a blow for a chance to escape. He would allow one of the bandits to hit him, while he would pounce on another one. If he could get a clean hit, he would have his freedom. There were some flaws with the plan, but it was all he got for now. Hopefully, it works. If he could free himself, he would immediately use his movement technique. There would be no way they would be able to see him if he uses it. A chance finally showed itself. Since the group couldn't all attack together, They had to take turns, and because of their understanding with each other, it was hard for Gray to predict who would attack next. One of the bandits struck out a blow which was headed for Gray's back. Gray stilled his mind and randomly picked one of them. The moment the blow was about to connect, Gray threw a blow towards the unsuspecting bandit. The bandit never expected Gray would launch an attack instead of defending. He quickly tried to retreat, but Gray moved closer to him. The moment the blow connected with Gray, he launched himself towards the bandit. The bandit was brought to the ground quickly. Gray immediately used the chance to escape the encirclement. He first distanced himself from the group so he could catch his breath. The bandits were dazed by the sudden turn of events. They never expected Gray to come up with such a plan to escape their entanglement. Hiss! Gray hissed in pain as he held the place where he was struck. "I'm done playing," Gray said with a cold voice. He felt pain all over his body, and the only thing on his mind now was getting revenge. "Lightning steps," Gray said. The bandits were immediately stunned when they saw Gray's foot being coated with lightning. Since they were still in the fusion plane, there was no way for them to manifest their elements outside of their bodies. What Gray just did was something only those in the arcane plane could do. "Arcane plane," the leader said in terror. "Elementalist of the arcane plane rarely gets into close combat." This was the reason they all mistook Gray for someone in the fusion plane. With the advantage of using long ranges attacks, Elementalist of the arcane plane could wipe out those in the fusion plane easily. No wonder he could keep up with them, the leader said with enlightenment. He now knew why Gray was that fast, and why he could take so many hits. Elementalists of the arcane plane naturally have stronger bodies than those in the fusion plane, and they are also quicker. He was scared shitless and didn't even dare to look back. It suddenly became quieter, and he stopped hearing noises. He suddenly heard a voice coming from his side. "Where are you heading to?" Gray said with a smile. Although he was bruised from the fight, it wasn't without its gain, and he had a strong body due to his daily physical training. The leader stopped and looked at Gray's smiling face. To him, the smiling face of Gray was that of an evil monster. Why would someone in the arcane plane engage in hand-to-hand combat? He screamed in his mind. It just didn't make sense. He started sweating buckets when he remembered how he wanted to rob Gray of his money. He thought of the phrase "a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing." I suddenly remembered my wife told me to get her something to eat, so I just wanted to hurry and get her the meal before returning, the bandit leader stammered. Gray clicked his tongue when he heard what he said. "Don't worry, I don't have any plans of killing you." When the bandit leader heard this, he felt happy inside. This was what worried him the most. He turned to look at his men and noticed they were just unconscious and not dead. "Thank you, oh handsome one," he said with a fawning smile. When Gray heard how he was addressed, he felt elated deep down. "I planned on dealing a blow or two to you, but I'm suddenly in a good mood," Gray said while laughing happily. "Come, let's head back," Gray added. He placed his hand around the shoulders of the leader like they were close friends. "Don't try anything funny," Gray reminded him. The leader obediently followed Gray back. He was scared if he refused, Gray would beat him up. When they got back to where the rest of the bandits were, Gray told him to wake them up. The bandits were surprised when they regained consciousness. They were unable to react before Gray wiped them all out. They all stared at Gray with trepidation. "Okay, now line up everyone," Gray instructed. After he caught up with the leader, he was suddenly struck with a wonderful idea. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The silent Rupt is out.